Our scripture today is from Mark chapter 5, verses 21 through 43. A girl restored to life and a woman healed. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered round him, and he was by the sea. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue, named Jairus, came, and when he saw him, fell at his feet and pleaded with him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, so that she may be well and live." So he went with him, and a large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from a flow of blood for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus, came up behind him in the crowd, and touched his cloak, for she said, perhaps to herself, if I but touch his cloak, I will be made well." Immediately her flow of blood stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my cloak?" And his disciples said to him, "You are in the crowd, pressing in on us. How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, some people came from the synagogue leader's house to say, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the synagogue leader, "Do not be afraid, only believe." He allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the synagogue leader's home, he saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. When he had entered, he said to them, "Why do you make such a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. Then he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in to where the child was. Taking her by the hand, he said to her, "Talitha koum," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the girl stood up and began to walk about. She was about 12 years of age. At this they were overcome with amazement. But he strictly ordered them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat.
Good morning. Last week, we began wading into the waters of what it means to love ourselves. It's often an uncomfortable space to sit in for those of us who follow Jesus. Love ourselves? Yes. Loving ourselves is the standard by which Jesus taught us to love our neighbors. Brian helped us to think last week about facing our shadows. And today we're going to explore a specific shadow, shame. you may ask, what does shame have to do with love? Shame interrupts and crowds out our ability to give and receive love. There is consensus among psychologists and researchers that shame is a universal experience. It's universal, primitive, and excruciating. So let's define shame, so we're all on the same page. An intensely painful feeling or experience of believing we are flawed and therefore unworthy of acceptance and belonging. And that comes from Brené Brown. The painful part isn't recognizing we have flaws. That comes pretty naturally. The painful part is if we draw the devastating conclusion, therefore we are unworthy of acceptance and belonging. Shame often comes with physical reaction, that sudden flush to the face, heat all over your body, that longing to just crawl out of your skin or wishing the floor would swallow you up. Sometimes our whole physical self wants to just shrink. The head drops, our shoulders slump. Even as shame is a universal emotion, it's not a place we have to stay. We can work towards releasing it and healing it. If you are someone who has moved far along enough in your journey that shame has little to no hold on you, we celebrate that. I believe that's possible. And I hope the words you hear today empower you to be a support to others who aren't there yet. Healing from shame takes a lot of time. And Jesus' radical life and example offers us wisdom and how to navigate it. So let's look more deeply at today's text with these two familiar healing stories. We first encounter Jairus. He's a synagogue leader and seeking restoration for his 12-year-old daughter who is near death. And then we meet a woman who has been bleeding continuously for 12 years. She's known in church tradition as Saint Veronica, so I will simply call her Veronica. So do you see shame in either of these situations? It's never explicitly stated, but it's not that hard to find. It's more obvious in the case of Veronica. For 12 years, as long as Jairus has been alive, she's been in a constant state of physical depletion due to perpetual blood loss. She spent everything, unsuccessfully, seeking a cure from doctors. She is broke financially, and we can infer emotionally too. Mark tells us she has suffered greatly, maintaining both just the physical cleanliness of life as well as the ceremonial cleanliness would have been so burdensome for her. Presuming she was married, Mosaic law forbade intimacy with her husband for these 12 years. Shame is likely her constant companion. In the case of Jairus, maybe we have to look a little more closely to see where shame was present. We're only in the 5th chapter of Mark, but already Mark has recorded multiple instances of the conflict that Jesus had with the religious leaders of the day, including in Galilee where this happened. Jairus is a synagogue leader. He's in the same cohort of this group that is constantly coming into conflict with Jesus. So for Jairus to approach Jesus, who they maybe saw as an adversary, if not an enemy, is risking shame, personally and professionally. Just a couple chapters back, these leaders are calling Jesus Prince of Demons. And how does Jesus respond? Mark records that immediately after Jairus' plea, Jesus went. No discussion, no gloating over Jairus' humble position at his feet. Jesus simply goes. Compassion and empathy dictate his actions. And Jesus doesn't go alone. The crowd follows him. Mark says the crowd is large, pressing. And amidst the throng, somehow Veronica finds her way to Jesus. And as we've heard over and over again, she touches Jesus' cloak. She instantly feels the restoration in her body. Jesus also feels it happen. I think it's valuable to note that Jesus and Veronica both believe what their body has told them. Jesus stops and under the circumstances asks a ridiculous question. Who touched me? His disciples point out that it's ludicrous, but Jesus insists. And here's something I hadn't thought about till this week. Jesus could have let it go. He knew the healing happened. He probably knew why. I like to think it's because he knew who and what had happened that he insisted, so that the disciples and the crowd would also know who was restored. And it would shift them at least a little bit. Veronica comes forward, trembling in fear, and spills and tells everything. Jesus is not repulsed by the functioning of a woman's body. He doesn't respond with disgust that she shares intimate parts of her medical reality in a public setting nonetheless. He doesn't shame her. He doesn't discredit her or dismiss her. He doesn't minimize her pain. He doesn't tell her, just go get some more sleep, take a Tylenol, maybe an antidepressant. Jesus affirms her and is the conduit for the relief she has sought. Jesus calls her daughter. Do you know how many times Jesus calls someone daughter in the Gospels? The only other time is addressing the women at the foot of the cross. Veronica is the only single person whom Jesus called daughter. Jesus acknowledges that her faith, manifested through her courageous actions, is the source of her healing. Just as he did with Jairus, Jesus responds with empathy and compassion. Never with shame, even when culturally appropriate or justified. And if we look ahead to the end of the story where Jairus' daughter is healed, as Jesus enters the community, the people attempt to shame him when he says that she is sleeping. And Jesus lets it wash right off of him. He will not pick it up. He does not allow shame for others. He does not allow shame for himself. I want to make a distinction here between shame and guilt, because sometimes we use those pretty similarly, almost interchangeably. And earlier I shared a well-established definition of shame. So here it is again. An intensely painful feeling or experience of believing we are flawed and therefore unworthy of acceptance and belonging. How is guilt different? Guilt is adaptive and helpful. It's holding something we've done or failed to do up against our values and feeling psychological discomfort. Shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. Something we've experienced, done, or failed to do makes us unworthy of connection. So we can see the distinction. Guilt is a response to a behavior or action or inaction, and it helps motivate us to make necessary changes. It's tied to behavior. Shame is about our personhood, believing that something is fundamentally flawed and wrong with us. Shame erodes our sense of identity, of being a valuable, beloved creation. We might associate it with feelings of humiliation, inadequacy, embarrassment, separation, rejection. In Brené Brown's research, her participants repeatedly told her that it's the worst feeling ever. I tend to agree. So what causes shame? There are infinite answers. It's as unique as the individuals that we are. And there's some threads of commonality. Expectations placed on us that we simply cannot meet. For some, crushing poverty and being held responsible for their poverty. That is inescapable. Spending time in manipulative and passive-aggressive environments can induce shame. Harsh criticism and bullying, especially in childhood. Receiving repeated degrading messages. Trauma and experiences of abandonment. Shame can come at us from so many directions. And if we're honest with ourselves, the historical church has used shame as a tool to induce fear and thereby exert control. Pastor Siri, who created the series, writes about the doctrine of original sin as it contributes to shame. She says that in churches where original sin has been strongly emphasized, where there are repeated messages of humanity's depravity and unworthiness, shame is introduced and blessed. Shame is a diabolically evil, albeit effective, way to control people. But it does not cultivate thriving, and it does not reflect Jesus. From the beginning, Anabaptists did not embrace the doctrine of original sin. But since that theology is still prevalent around us, it's in the water we swim in, it creeps into our consciousness. We may unknowingly absorb it. When we begin to believe that our very identity is sin and depravity, that belief ushers in shame for who we are at our core. And this is not what we see in Jesus, is it? Our starting point with God is as beloved children. Yes, we are often hurting. We are lost. We are confused, in need of healing, of transformation, correction. And part of the healing Jesus offers is helping us see our identity as it always has been, valued and beloved. Our identity is not determined by our actions, as shame would have us believe. If we look around us at people who are studying the well-being of our emotional health, our spiritual health, many are trying to figure out, how do we undo this? And we look specifically at Brown's research, she found that experiencing empathy is the opposite of experiencing shame. When the individuals she studied received empathy and compassion from others, it helped strengthen their sense of connection, and it interrupted that cycle of shame. It's exactly the way we repeatedly see Jesus responding in the entirety of the Gospels. Empathy and compassion. It interrupts shame. I'm fascinated to see how psychological research is proving the effectiveness of the way of Jesus. The science is both catching up and also offering new insights on how we can create this shalom community we've always been intended to have. Is it possible to entirely eradicate shame? I doubt it, but I'm convinced we can powerfully reduce its impact on us. An environment of love is the best environment where we can face our shadows, our shortcomings, our failures, not shame. Love received in the form of empathy and compassion goes a long way to displace shame. When that flush of shame wells up in you, what do we do to interrupt it? There's no magic formula. It takes consistent work to undo these patterns, to halt the messages that we sometimes tell ourselves or that culture puts on us. Some of us would benefit from a good counselor to help us walk that path, especially if we have trauma or significant harm in our history. Until then, I think a good place to start is imagine Jesus responding to us as we saw him today respond to Jairus and Veronica. Jairus asked Jesus to come, And Jesus moved immediately toward him. No argument, no conditions, no discussion. Jesus comes near when we ask. Jesus responded to Veronica's vulnerability with tenderness, with healing. Jesus does the same for us, calling us daughter, son, beloved child, and tenderly offering empathy and compassion if we're willing to receive it. I hope, in addition to imagining that, we also check the messages we are telling ourselves. I don't see a person in this room who would see another as inherently unworthy, but we look in the mirror and tell that person a different message. Does our own voice to ourselves contain empathy and compassion? Or do we continue to lay on the shame and condemnation? Because shame leaves so little room for love. Brené Brown's research highlighted the power of empathy received from another. Is there a show of hands of anyone this week who asked another person for words of affirmation in a moment of vulnerability? I didn't. We're not quick to do that, to seek out that type of support, although it would be powerful if we did. So next best is to start extending ourselves that compassion, to treat ourselves the way Jesus does, with grace and understanding, because our humanity is not shameful. And we also have the power to be that conduit for others, to be quick to notice opportunities to extend empathy, to interrupt that shame cycle for others, and to be a voice of healing. If guilt, on the other hand, prompts us to acknowledge and own up to our mistakes, don't dismiss it as shame. Accept the conviction that we may be transformed. Own up to our mistakes and be courageous in that process too. Beloved family, shame is neither healthy nor holy. When it shows up, because it will, may we hear Jesus' words echo in our heads. Daughter, son, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed. Will you pray with me? God of empathy, of compassion, a God who seeks to undo shame and offer a better path. Give us eyes to see the ways we treat ourselves, and may we love ourselves in the way that you have taught and modeled, and let the shame fall off our shoulders. We ask all these things in Jesus' compassionate name. Amen.